Hello, everybody. Welcome to Joey's Scarf. This is a knitting and crocheting podcast, and this is my very first episode. I'm Linda, and you can find me on Ravelry and Instagram as Linda Grace. I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. First of all, why I chose or am choosing to try my hand at podcasting, knitting podcasts, especially when there are hundreds of them on YouTube. In fact, I searched on YouTube for knitting podcasts and came up with well over 800 channels devoted to knitting. And on Ravelry, there are over 1,000 groups, knitting podcasting groups. So I'm not sure where I'm going to fit it in, but the reason I wanted to do this is because, frankly, I want somebody to talk to about knitting. I'm mildly obsessed with it, and I really don't know anyone else personally who shares the same level of interest that I do. I'm not sure where I stumbled across my first knitting podcast, but it has certainly changed the way I think about knitting. It has the podcasters that I watch are they encourage my interest. I'm exposed to new things, new yarns, new patterns, a community, a knitting community that has the same enthusiasm for knitting that I do. So that's why I'm doing this. I hope to gain some friends and share my interest with you. I am looking down at my notes. I'm a little nervous. It's kind of hard to. I'm sure if anyone is watching this and they have a podcast, you know the first episode is probably the worst or the hardest to do. I am a wife, a mother, a grandmother. I have tried to engage those around me in knitting. My daughter, my sisters, my granddaughter, and even my husband. I ask him all the time, "Don't you want to learn? Don't you want to learn?" He's very interested in what I'm doing. He'll traipse around with me in our local yarn stores, and we have traveled far and wide to visit. Anytime we travel, first thing I do is look up where the local yarn store is, and we visit, and he likes to wander around the yarn just as much as I do, I think. So I have been crocheting and knitting for about over 40 years. I started with crocheting. My mother-in-law at the time taught me how, and I really loved it from the very first hook, very first chain I made. I attempted knitting. I tried to teach myself, and I did make a few things when I was pregnant with my daughter, but I found crocheting much easier than knitting, especially when I would make a mistake in knitting. It was more difficult for me to figure out how to correct my mistakes. With crocheting, you kind of just tear back to a couple of rows and you're set to go. This the technology now has made it so much easier with all the tutorials, the video tutorials, which for me is how I've learned a lot of new techniques in knitting. So about 10 years ago, my husband and I were on a trip to Florida, and we happened to wander. At the time, we were very interested in antiques and collectibles. We wandered into this antique store in Sarasota, and the store was divided in half. Half the store was a knitting yarn store, and the other half was the antiques. And I just was mesmerized by the beautiful yarns. And the woman who owned the shop had these yarns just hanging down, and all, of course, in the cubbies across the wall. And there were a group of women gathered around in a cozy little nook of the store, corner nook, and in antique rocking chairs, and they were knitting. And I instantly caught the bug, and I wanted to learn. And I asked the owner of the store if she would uh, steer me towards a beginner pattern. And she said, "Do you want to learn?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "Well, come over here and sit down." And she sat me in one of the cozy rocking chairs, and she showed me how to knit again, refresh my knitting skill, which really I didn't have any, and I felt like a true beginner at when she was showing me. And since then, I've just progressed, and I've been knitting ever since then. But in the past few years, with YouTube and all the different new kinds of yarns and the availability to buy the yarns is just so much better than it was when I first started knitting, and even 10 years ago. So that's how I caught the bug. And the knitting store is the shop is no longer there in business, but it was really a unique experience. Um, let's see. I So that's why that's my knitting history. I dabbled in everything. I wanted to learn everything. I've tried socks and sweaters, and I started out as a thrower, and I really stuck to it and learned how to do the knit continentally, and that's past year I've really honed that skill, and I don't think I would go back to being a thrower. It's continental knitting for me is much less stress on my joints and much less movement, and I practiced and practiced until I got the hang of it, and now it comes very easily to me. I'm not sure what direction this podcast is going to take. Of course, I will gladly show my works in progress, my finished objects. But for this first episode, I think it's just going to be an introduction, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit about why I'm here. Um, the name of my podcast is Joey's Scarf. Um, as I said, I have 3 children. I have a daughter and she's married and she has 3 children. I have a son who has 2 sons, and I lost my middle son Joe 5 years ago to colon cancer. Um, it's been very difficult, and knitting has gotten me through a lot of difficult times. I recently I had made my son a scarf when he was going through his chemo, and he loved it and he wore it. And recently, my daughter-in-law was going through some of Joe's things while I was at the house, and I noticed that the scarf was in one of the bins, and I asked her if I could have it, and she said, "Of course." And it was very emotional. But that scarf sits on my chair in the bedroom next to my bed, and it just brings me a lot of comfort because I remember sitting with him while he was going through chemo and knitting that scarf. So it's been knitting has, as I said, given me a lot of comfort. So that's why I'm dedicating this podcast to Joe. I think that's about it for the introductions. I can show you a few things that I'm working on for right now. One of the things is, yes, you guessed it, it's the granny stripe Afghan. Um, I saw everyone making these on the podcast and on Instagram, and I had a lot of leftover little skeins of sock yarn. So I decided to jump in, and and I still love to crochet. And so this is going to be a work in progress for a while. I'm not in a hurry to get it done. It's just going to grow as I finish socks, some of my socks, and I have left over. I do have a few mini skeins that I got for Christmas, and they'll go into the blanket. Um, but and you know it's a good break from doing other things. Oh, and this bag is from the Crafty Toads of New Jersey. Crafty Toads. They have a podcast, the Crafty Toads, and I bought one of their bags. I'm looking. I thought I saw somebody behind me. Another project I'm working on is socks, and it's just my recipe, my favorite recipe for socks that they fit me. I found a recipe that the socks fit me well. I do them on size 0 needles, and these are Chow 47 inch. I'm doing them 2 at a time, and magic loop. The yarn is from Alma Park Yarns. She has a podcast too, Alma Park, and she has a llama farm. And we went to visit her and I picked up some yarn. And the knitting bag is from, I love these bags. They're from Stitching Plaza. I got them on Etsy, and I have several of them. And I like the drawstring and the fabric, very cute. And I have a couple of them. That's how much I like them. Another thing I'm working on is this is a pattern by Tin Can Knits, and the pattern is a free Ravelry download, and it's called Wheat, and it's just a simple scarf, but it has this little detail here of ribbing, of 1x1 ribbing, and it's just a nice break, simple TV knitting. The yarn is Barocco vintage, and I'm enjoying knitting that. And this is another Stitching Plaza bag. Cowl I'm wearing, I made a couple of years ago, I think maybe last year, and it's just a simple tube, provisional cast on, and I think the yarn is also Barocco. It's a striped, green and red striped, very warm. Today it's a little chilly out. I have, of course, a stash. I have recently, because of you podcasters out there, you are all enablers, but I've recently discovered hand-dyed, indie-dyed yarn, and I am so interested in that, and I've gotten ordered quite a few skeins of the indie-dyed sock yarn, so my pile is growing, and I'll share those with you on the next podcast. I'd like to give a shout out to Barbara from the Flame and Fiber Flame and Fiber podcast, and also the crafty toads, and you have inspired me to try to do this. And as you can tell, I'm nervous, but um, I hope that my reaching out will encourage others to reach out to me, and I can become part of the podcasting and knitting community and have a, a group to share my enthusiasm for this wonderful craft. And I'll talk more about the instances that knitting has helped me, and how I've gotten through some difficult times. I'll share some of my stash with you, my acquisitions. But for now, I think I'm just going to call this an introduction. I hope, depending on the response, I'll probably set up a group in Ravelry, um, but we'll see. And I'm sure I rushed through everything, the works in progress, the knitting bags, the mentions, but I will be putting those things across the screen and in the description. And I think I'm going to leave this pretty much unedited so that you can see how nervous I am. I'll leave it here for now, and I hope that you'll come back and visit me for the next podcast. I'm looking forward to seeing how this goes, and if it's going to be a thing for me. I know that this community is just a great bunch of people, and I, I'm happy that I've discovered all of you. So for now, I'm going to say goodbye and hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.